It started almost accidentally when Moving Visions was a full-time company in 1978. Started in 76, working up to that. And we simply found that it was difficult to find work in the summers because the theaters were closed. And we didn't want to do nothing. And I decided we'd try riding around cathedrals to see if we could instigate this cathedral tour. So it was almost a mechanical way to keep going at that time. But what was interesting is that even when the company was professional and full-time, it became a very special event. And then you began to wonder, why is it such a special event? And not just because nobody else was doing it, but the kind of resonance that it pulled out of the dancers and the sort of pieces that it pulled out of us, which kind of has now zeroed down now that this company is a part-time one, and must be because people do other things, that this is almost all we do, and the focus of the whole group is on this. I think it's interesting now we get to this date, because when Moving Visions started, for instance, it was 1976, and the funding in the arts and in dance was increasing. Of course, now it's been decreasing more or less since 1979, although it's difficult to put a finger on the exact date, but it's been going down and not keeping up, and the dance companies have been falling away. And the question I would keep asking myself is, why are we so little needed in our society? I mean, we can be cut because we're of no use or no need, and you can never defend it on any basis of it having a function. And then it kind of seemed to tie into the whole absence of any religious structure in the society. So the arts weren't serving anything of any particular value, so they weren't valuable. If they were just entertainment, well, then you can get that cheaply and it can pay for itself. But if something has a value which can't pay for itself, then it's of no use. Now, there would be a time when all the other arts except dance were at the service of buildings and religions like the Christian one. And so the attempt actually since that, as that thought began to develop, has been to enter back into a function. And although you could argue the Christian religion or church isn't very strong, I think the imagery is, because we grow up with it. And I'm not a Christian myself, not in the normal sense anyway, don't go to a church. But I think the power of these buildings and the power of the imagery and then the power of dance as an art form, if it uses them, it rather modestly uses them. I mean, you don't really try and invent anything new, this sort of Jungian archetypal collective memory thing, that there's huge power in them, and you just have to find how to slot them into a contemporary context. The kind of impetus, my family started what's called the Unitarian Fellowship. That's very liberal. There's no dogma in the west coast of Canada, so sort of Emersonian tradition. But there's been a lot of research into finding what the imagery means, and then finding not just what it sort of literally means, but what can evoke what. And people like Jung are, of course, very useful for that. So you understand how to get resonance out of the images. And I think from Jung, it's like a child with a doll, that a child can at one moment really love a doll and simultaneously know it's not real. And the kind of the Christian imagery is you don't have to believe there's actually a God in heaven above the clouds and so on, and yet you relate sometimes to the images of Christ or the saints, or in a very literal way. So you're asking your mind not to be literal, but to be kind of, to take a metaphysical meaning, not a physical meaning. It's not that he was a physical man, that he has a metaphysical, symbolic effect on you if you allow it. So one does quite a lot of research into the imagery, but I think that almost the more important is how to receive it, or how to encourage the audience to receive it. For instance, one thing you have to realize that the audience don't actually have the same relation to much of this imagery as they would have if they were living in the medieval Christian world. They also don't know anything about dance, much, even less so. So you have to stand up and tell them what you're doing, which is what I do before the performance. You have to lead them in. Then when they have a rational grasp of what you're doing, then they can get the more than rational grasp, but they have to have the rational one first. So there's a mix of those. I've tried to think of this word numinous, to take a word so that you could try and be specific about, sort of following from Wittgenstein, who talked about what is mystical. He said, anything you can think about clearly, clear thought, clear language. Then he says there are things you cannot think about clearly. They make themselves manifest. They are what is mystical. So he said, these things that you can't think about clearly, this mysterious area. And then I just wanted to find a word I could decide to characterize, and decided not to use mystical because there are lots of things that you can't put into words that aren't of a religious nature, like what the color red is. You can't say what it is. So we want something that's a division of the mystical. And then I just chose a word from the German Rudolf Otto, numinous, numen meaning God. But again, a breakdown of the word doesn't tell you what you mean. You mean a sort of religious feeling, which I think everybody has. That's terribly important, that part of a positive attitude to the world would be to see things with a numinous content or a mysterious overlay, or the way you are when you're a child and the night wind, the feel it has, or the sound of the sea, or you throw a knife in a tree and you feel guilty because it feels like it's alive. Those sort of things that we lose. Or what I've been thinking about lately in these pieces, particularly the sort of the things that are natural to human beings that can be amplified. Like if we didn't love little kids, we didn't all get gooey about little kids. If mothers didn't love their children, of course, everything would fall apart. So the instinct to sympathy, compassion, even love is actually very great. And if you pump on that, then you get the numinous experience of what the Christians would call love and what Gandhi would call ahimsa. So that you're trying to bring out religious experience, but I just wanted to give it a name so that I could use religious and mystical and all those words vaguely and abstractly, so you would have one word you're trying to, because a religious experience can also be the kind of experience which is politically, people, the Church of Rome depended very much on its authoritarian power, and some religious experience was seeing that the Church survived, but not for numinous reasons, for political ones. So you just want to find a word that means this special area of experience. We're not a service, although we have been used. On last Sunday, we were the service at a Unitarian church in Hampstead. In general, I think it's a special event, and it is to raise numinous experience. If we call that a service, it's a service. I think one of the problems is the difference between worldly and otherworldly religions. There's a tendency in any religion, but I think in the Christian one, for a service to literally be something that puts you to sleep, quiets your passions, if you want to think of it that way, but puts everything to sleep. It's all very quiet. And there's this goes along with otherworldly religions, where this man Joseph Campbell, who wrote The Masks of God, wrote about otherworldly religions as those which come out of mythogenic periods of despair. So a period like that of the Roman Empire, when it seemed that it was impossible that the world would ever be better. I mean, it was at the time of Christ that they would always be oppressed. There was no way you could get away from this corrupt, morally corrupt, militarily very powerful and healthy regime. And the time of, say, St. Augustine is the same thing. That was the breakup of the Roman Empire, where the world just seemed irretrievable. So at times like that, you get religions which are otherworldly, and they're trying to cut the worldly part of themselves off. Then that's where dance gets into trouble. St. Augustine said you should hate your own flesh. And so, of course, you can't dance, but anything that's of the world you must dispose of. Well, dance is of the world. It's of the flesh. It comes through the flesh. So sometimes when you ask about service, I see some services as an attempt to die. And dance isn't that kind of numinous experience. It's experience through the body, through life, through color, through sound. Still, religious experience, but of another kind. When the German expressionist dancers picked up the word that's been, well, probably Gnostic first, ecstasy, that you step outside the body, out, standing in stasis. So that's, the spirit steps out of the body. And that's not very good for dance, because we want the spirit in the body, and not as the Gnostics had it, as a sort of imprisoned little flame that finally will get out, not in body in that sense, but like permeating it and part of it. So I made up this other word, sarkistasy, from sarkistos, meaning the flesh. You could say somastasy, which would mean the soul in the body, but that could mean like water in a cup. Sarkistasy means the spirit in the flesh. And you see these kids, the dancers, the best of them, let's say Neil, who's a wonderful saint, it really does something to him to move. It changes his being. That's why he's a good dancer. It's not just pointy feet and things. It's that the act of it puts the spirit in his body. Or how do you say that backwards? The moving the body makes spirit. And that's the way dance must be. So it's not an otherworldly religion. What we do, it's of this world, of this flesh.